Hello, everyone, and welcome to EBRP's Community Council webinar sponsored by FiberCell, a subsidiary of Castle Creek Biosciences. My name is Stephanie Ishu. I'm the Director of Communications for EBRP, and I'll be moderating the webinar this evening. Thank you for joining us to learn about the DeFi-RDEB Phase 3 clinical study. We recognize that participation in a clinical trial is a huge decision for EB patients and their families, especially those of you with young ones. And we believe that there are many important questions that need to be asked and answered, so that's what we're here to do today. We want to provide you with an informed perspective from experts that are going to answer those questions for you and help alleviate any burden you may have in making this important decision. Before we begin the program, I would like to introduce Michael Hund, EBRP's Chief Executive Officer, and he's going to give a quick update on our programs and research.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for joining us this evening. While 2020 has not been the year any of us expected, and there's much we do not yet know, we do know this. Our team at EBRP will not stop moving ahead to fund vital life-saving treatments, advance our innovative model, and lead our mission to cure EB. And there's much to be optimistic about, including for the first time ever, 4 Phase 3 clinical trials in EB, including Castle Creek Biosciences clinical trial that we will be discussing tonight. Founded in 2010 by a dedicated group of parents and Jill and Ed Vetter of Pearl Jam, EBRP is the largest global nonprofit dedicated to accelerating treatments and cures for EB. Since then, we have raised over $40 million to fund 75 research projects in more than a dozen countries. Last year was a record year as we supported $5.5 million in projects for 21 projects in 6 different countries. Our funding of research and treatments is not only moving ahead, it is in fact growing. We just approved $4.8 million in research awards to 11 projects across the globe for our first grant cycle of 2020. Our most recent July grant cycle, currently under review, provides further proof of the most brilliant and promising work from the global medical community, sharing our goal to treat and cure EB as quickly as possible. We are actively engaged with the medical community to ensure we are doing everything possible to keep research projects and clinical trials moving ahead. EBRP is committed to innovation. We're building a first-of-its-kind data platform to bring together researchers, clinicians, and patients. Our EB Clinical Research Consortium, uniting the 20 leading EB hospitals of excellence to work together to put speed into research and discovery, and our pioneering venture philanthropy model that enables every piece of research we fund to have the added upside of generating additional revenue to go right back into funding more research until a cure is found. We've worked with the world's leading doctors and scientists over the past 10 years to drive meaningful progress and have built the infrastructure, roadmap of projects, and team to execute this very important task. When we started in 2010, there was only 2 clinical trials for EB. Now there are more than 30. We remain hopeful that a meaningful treatment or cure will occur in the near future. EB families like you show us on a daily basis what courage, grit, and perseverance looks like, and we look to you as our inspiration as we forge ahead. With you standing beside us, nothing will stop us in our mission to cure EB. So thank you. Today I have the pleasure to introduce John Maslowski, CEO of Castle Creek Biosciences, who will share recent news about the company and its platform of novel therapies for EB.
Great. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to you and Stephanie for hosting tonight and to EB Research Partnership for all their support. So I'll be very brief. I would just wanted to introduce just briefly our company, and Castle Creek Biosciences is a new name as of this year. And we are developing gene and cell therapies to create a novel pipeline of these novel drugs that we can use to treat rare diseases in skin with high unmet needs. And if we sound familiar, and you've probably seen us through the advocacy events, we are the merger of FiberCell Science and Castle Creek Pharma. So 2 companies who had a lot of synergies working in the epidermolysis bullosa space have now combined to become Castle Creek Biosciences. So really excited with a strong new team moving forward. We have a broad pipeline in EB looking at recessive dystrophic EB in our gene therapy front and others in EB simplex on other product fronts in our pipeline. But today we're going to be talking about our lead candidate FCX007. And I'll briefly talk a little bit about what that technology is. And I want to really make a note here that as you're looking around and researching our trial, you'll see that, you've heard mentioned before from Stephanie, that FiberCell is the sponsor. So there's no confusion. FiberCell is a subsidiary of Castle Creek Biosciences. So you are dealing with our full team when you're moving through these steps in the clinical trial. So a little on the technology, if you're not familiar, we're creating a personalized gene therapy that come from your own cells. We take your cells, we are collecting them through small biopsy punches and culturing them at our manufacturing facility here in the Philadelphia area. And then we grow them up in our labs and create more and more of these cells. And then we use what's called the viral vector to introduce a functional copy of a gene into the cells and able to produce a protein of choice. And in this case, we are working specifically in the dystrophic EB space. So we are targeting Col7A1 or type 7 collagen with the goal to now have the cells have the ability to produce functional type 7 collagen. So we continue to grow those up, and then we cryogenically store them as a bank. So essentially there's this bank of your own cells that can pull from and use for product production over the course of time. And then they're reinduced back into intradermally back into the patient in the area of wounding and disease. So we've been developing this over the last course of a few years, and as we mentioned, now moving to the phase 3 trial. But wanted to introduce the technology in the company shortly, but I think most importantly, we'll move into the clinic design and to the PIs themselves. So I'd like to introduce our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Mary Spellman.
Thank you, John. Briefly, we're going to review the study design on, I believe, the next slide. There we go. Currently, this study is only being performed in the US, and we have 3 wonderful centers, and I'm lucky enough today to be joined by 2 of our investigators at those centers. The focus of the study is really on children and adults who have chronic recessive dystrophic EB. And we need to focus on that population. As John said, we've got a gene therapy to replete that missing gene. The key comparison we're making in this study is between wounds that are treated with FCX007 injections and wounds that are treated only with standard of care. So we'll be looking at paired wounds across patients, and we have been able to enroll patients with up to 3 sets of pairs, or 6 wounds in total. We'll be assessing wound closure at all the visits after the first injection of FCX007. We've really deliberately designed the study to reduce and minimize patient visits to a medical center. Although our investigators are always able to see you as needed, we want to reduce the trips, particularly in this time with COVID, but also just due to the general inconvenience. During the study, after a first on-site visit where we harvest the cells that John just described as they're used for the cell product manufacturing, there's a brief period of time where we observe the wounds for their chronicity and be certain that they're generally stable over time. On the first day of the first injection, we're able to inject the FCX007 in 1 to 3 wounds of the multiple wound pairs, and there are up to 4 injection cycles every 12 weeks through the 9th month. And then we have a follow-up visit at week 48 or month 12 before entering a much longer-term follow-up period. We're consistently watching for the safety of the product as well as the effectiveness. That's a very high-level overview of the design of the study. I'm very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Anna Bruckner and Dr. Peter Marinkovich, who are key investigators and have experience with this study or this type of study. Please join me in welcoming them. Dr. Anna Bruckner is a professor of dermatology and pediatrics at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and the section head of pediatric dermatology. She's also the co-director of the Epidermolysis Bullosa Clinic at Children's Hospital, Colorado. And I also want to welcome Dr. Peter Marinkovich, who's the Associate Professor of Dermatology and Director of the Stanford Blistering Disease Clinic at Stanford University here in Palo Alto. So thank you for being with us, and I'm going to turn the program back to Stephanie, and she'll run through some of the questions we've received.
Thank you, Dr. Spellman. And thanks again to all of the EB patients and families who registered tonight and submitted their questions about the DeFi-RDEB study. Dr. Bruckner and Dr. Marinkovich will address each one. So let's get started. Dr. Bruckner, patients want to know about the potential time commitment and schedule for treatment for this phase 3 trial. Please walk us through the steps from a patient's first on-site visit through wound treatment and long-term follow-up.
Great, thank you for that lovely introduction, Mary and Stephanie, and thank you to all of you who are participating this evening. We really appreciate your interest in this study and for spending your time with us this evening. So yes, to answer the question, you can see we've replaced the wound schema, or excuse me, the study schema here. It's important to understand that the first visit is always going to involve consent process where, assuming that a patient's interested, we would have an extensive discussion about what's involved with the study and obtain informed consent before any study activities take place. But at that first visit, there are several biopsies that are taken, and those biopsies are crucial both for evaluating patient qualifications and also obtaining the skin cells that are needed to develop the treatment. After that first screening visit, assuming that the patient qualifies based on their genetics and skin characteristics, a period of wound monitoring is done, which is done at home. And then at the end of that wound monitoring period, the patient is able to come back in for the treatment visits, which occur every 12 weeks. At those treatment visits, the wounds are identified and then treated with the medication which is injected into the wound. Now that can be done with anesthesia to make the process more comfortable. And then those wounds are reevaluated and retreated, like I said, on an every 12-week basis. The primary treatment period is about 9 months after the screening period. And then there's a final visit 1 year or so after the screening process. After that, we will go into a long-term follow-up period, which is important in terms of looking at both the efficacy as well as safety of this treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Bruckner. During the screening and monitoring period of this study, the patient's wounds are photographed and then those images are used to select wounds for treatment. Also, photos continue to be taken throughout the wound treatment period. Can you tell us about the importance of these photos, how they're used, and who is responsible for taking them?
Yes, of course. So the wounds are being photographed both during the wound monitoring period and also during the study itself. Part of the reason why the wound photography is very important during the monitoring period is that we want to make sure we're identifying the right types of wounds for this study. So we want to make sure that we're looking at wounds that are chronic and having a difficult time healing. So patients will be given an iPhone with a special app on it that will allow them to take pictures of their wounds at home. Of course, they would receive training on how to use this app appropriately. And in addition, when patients come into the clinic, we would be supplementing the home photographs with images that are taken during the clinic visits. But this type of monitoring is really important so that we can, as I said, identify the right types of wounds before treatment starts. And then after treatment starts, it allows us to see whether or not those wounds are changing in response to treatment and appropriately document the change in wound size over time.
Great. We also have another question for you. Patients asked about the study's follow-up period. Specifically, why is it important? How long does it last? And what does a patient need to do during this time?
Yeah, great question. So there are several visits, as you could see during the study schema. Of course, the visits during the first year are more focused on active treatment and following the wounds. And then the long-term follow-up period is from years 2 to 15 after a patient enrolls in the study. Now, this is really important for several reasons. One, is that we want to look at the durability of our treatment response, but we also want to be looking at the long-term safety of a new treatment. Gene therapy is exciting, but it's also very novel, and so we want to make sure that there are no unanticipated problems that we would not have foreseen during a short-term period of the study. We are trying to minimize the burden of this long-term follow-up as much as possible, Much of it can be done over the phone or remotely, but the rationale for the seemingly long time period is really to look at long-term safety.
Great, thank you so much for these details, Dr. Bruckner.
Sure.
Now I'm going to ask Dr. Marinkovich a question. We had some questions from patients asking who to contact about the study, the locations of the clinical sites, and how to get other information about the study. How do you suggest they proceed?
Okay, well, first I just want to welcome everybody on this webinar and just let you know that I am so happy to be working on this trial and to working with all of you. You know, a lot of us here in the EB research field have been working for a long time. And for a long time, we never really had a chance to offer anything to all of you. We were just still in the early stages, but now we got all these really cool clinical trials going on like this one. And it is just, it's so exciting to be able to offer this to the EB community. So anyway, as far as this particular trial, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov. And there's the identifier there you can see on the screen. And, or you can kind of search for, you know, Castle Creek, fibrocell, epidermolysis bullosa, my name, Dr. Bruckner's name, and you'll find it. And then that gives you some information, and that also gives you contact information too about who to contact for the study. And then, you know, it'll have different people's names out of different sites. And then it's really important for us to give you as much information as we can about the trial. It's, I think that the idea of informed consent is really important for us, so that your questions that you have and all the information we have to give you, I think will be very important to go through. And as far as, I mean, also my name, you remember my name, M. Peter Marinkovich, and that's my email, mpm@stanford.edu. So I think it'll be at the, also we'll have some additional contact information at the end of the Q&A session on the screen. You know, it's just, this is a big thing that you're getting into, and we want to make sure you understand the full ramifications. You know, on this trial, we'll be doing a biopsy to prepare your cells. And so the Castle Creek folks will be doing a lot of work growing your cells up over months and, you know, to get ready for the trial. So we would, hey, it's perfectly, it's your right to drop out anytime you wish, you know, that is your right. But we would rather you didn't, you know, if they started making all the cells and everything. So that's why in the beginning, it's really important to make sure that we make sure that this is the right trial for you, so that we don't get a dropout. Although if it does happen, we're totally understanding of it.
Thank you, Dr. Marinkovich. And I echo your excitement for how many exciting trials are out there today, and especially this one that we're teaching everyone about today. We also received several questions about traveling to the clinical site, including who should travel with the patient. They also want to know if a person at the clinical site can assist with the travel plans. Based on your experience with EB patients and their families participating in trials, what do you suggest?
Yeah, well, it's very important. We understand that you really need a caregiver to be able to help out and help to navigate you and help out with the wound dressings and everything. And so we allow, you know, one or more people, support people or family members to go with you to the clinical study site. And, you know, when we book the travel and the hotel and everything like that, we'll get all that information. So that is taken care of. And then we'll also have some material on site, you know, as far as wound dressings. We may not have your exact ones, but we'll have some. And if you kind of tell us up front, we can try to work with you on this. And then, you know, obviously, you know, it's good to bring your own dressings as well, just as an additional precaution.
Great, thank you. And knowing that there are expenses associated with traveling to a medical center, patients and families want to know who pays for their transportation, hotel, and meals, and what is considered a reimbursable expense versus not. They also asked if dressings and medications are provided at no cost to the patient. What are the study's guidelines about these expenses?
Okay, well, I just want to tell you that I'm sure Dr. Bruckner both, we're on your side as far as we're your advocates. You know, we kind of look at our university and the sponsors and like the finance people who work in there who are always, you know, trying to cover the expenses. We are your advocates. So we are going to fight for you to get your expenses covered. And so you can count on that. In fact, I enjoy these types of discussions, trying to advocate for you on this type of stuff. So, you know, things that we can reimburse you for is air and ground transportation to your, you know, back and forth from the home to the clinical site, you know, parking, you know, things like Uber, hotels, you know, costs for meals, you know, like in Palo Alto, the meals cost a little bit more, you know, than you know, other parts of the country. And so we're going to factor that in. And there'll be some Mepitel dressings is what we have on site. And so, but, you know, you can also bring your own. And we have some other supplies and stuff that we can work with you on once you get to the site. I think also I just want to mention too that, you know, in this COVID time frame, we're very sensitive to trying to be as COVID friendly as we can. So we'll be doing things at the Stanford site, I know, and probably similar to the Colorado site, that we won't be having you sitting around the waiting rooms with other patients. You'll be going straight from your car up to the clinic room, getting your stuff done, then going straight from the clinic room back to the car. And we try to minimize, you know, exposure and try to keep you as safe as possible. That'll be part of it too.
Very important, especially during these times. Thank you, Dr. Marinkovich and Dr. Bruckner, for answering these questions. Also, everyone, please note the study sites that are provided here with the contact information. And so now, as you all know, the EB community was very open and responsive to our requests for questions, so we have a couple more for you. Dr. Bruckner, a family asked if wounds on the face could be treated in this study. More broadly, can wounds be treated on any area of the body, or is there any restriction, such as not treating wounds on the hand, feet, or face?
Sorry. It's always going to happen that somebody tries to talk when they're muted. So that was a great question. So for this study specifically, we are really looking at certain wounds, really just because we want to make sure that we have kind of good control to minimize variability between in between patients. And so for the sake of this study, treating wounds on the face will not be allowed. Now that's not to say that if a patient has problematic wounds that this in the future, if this were an approved therapy, it would not necessarily mean that a wound such as the face could not be treated, but just for the sake of this particular study, we have to kind of stick with the guidelines of the locations that will be treated, and that will exclude the face.
Thank you. Also, Dr. Marinkovich, it looks like I missed one of my questions for you. You had spoken about wound dressings and medications, but could you also talk about itch? We know that it is a big problem with RDEB lesions. In this study, what can be used to treat itching associated with a patient's treated or untreated?
Well, I mean, we have you know, this therapy is meant to reverse EB, and so the therapy itself should reduce itch. Now, itch is kind of an interesting phenomenon. I mean, sometimes when wounds heal and recover, you know, itching is sort of a natural part of that. If sometimes though, when wounds are chronic, they can also itch. So we're sensitive to that. When you come to the site, you're treated also not just to the clinical trial, but also to, as I interact with you as a physician, as an EB physician. And so if you have itch, you know, and would like some therapy for that, I'm glad to just sort of work with you on that. And also with your doctors at home to help with itch. And I have a few ideas. And I'm sure Dr. Bruckner does as well as far as helping you with your itch. But it's not like part of the trial, but of course we're glad to help you if it comes up.
Thank you very much. And lastly, I know that you touched on this earlier a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic, but just to reiterate, recognizing that a patient's health is compromised already when having RDEB, travel can be especially difficult. So what is the impact of the pandemic on this study? And if a patient elects to participate in the study, what precautions are being taken to protect their health?
Well, like I said, I mean, once you get, you know, to Stanford, we do all we can to be able to help you with that, so that we try to minimize the time that you're spending in the building. You're just going straight from your car right up to the clinic, right to the clinic room, and there'll be a minimal, we're not going to have a bunch of people coming into the room. There'll just be a very minimal staff that we come in, getting you taken care of. You know, there's the initial visits with the injections. We'll be doing that efficiently and with just the staff that's needed, and the follow-up visits as well. We try to do that efficiently. We'll all be wearing masks and goggles, and you know, everybody will try to practice as good at hand hygiene and social distancing as we can. It's really, really critical for us and for the protection of our patients.
And thank you again to our presenters and our sponsor, Castle Creek Biosciences, for today's webinar. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to send them to info@ebresearch.org, and we will make sure that the team responds and we'll send those answers right back to you. Also, we are going to post an educational patient aid that explains the basics of clinical trials, and soon today's webinar will be archived and also put on EBRP's website under the Community Council tab, which is underneath the research dropdown. So thank you again for joining us, everyone, and enjoy your evening.